Why do we return to the very people who wound us? Why do we, as individuals and as societies, sometimes crave the touch, the approval, or the leadership of those who inflict pain? It's a question that lingers in the silent aftermath of heartbreak, in the echo of a lover's betrayal, in the collective memory of nations that have idolized their own oppressors. Consider the friend who can't seem to leave a toxic relationship, no matter how many times they're hurt. Or the millions who, time and again, place their faith in leaders who promise salvation but deliver only suffering. These are not isolated stories. They are patterns, recurring, haunting, and strangely familiar. Perhaps you felt it yourself. The magnetic pull towards someone who withholds affection, the inexplicable urge to seek validation from those who never give it freely. Maybe you've watched as entire communities, even entire countries, rally behind figures who exploit their fears and insecurities. The paradox is everywhere, woven into the fabric of our personal lives and our collective history. What is it about pain that draws us in? Why do we sometimes mistake cruelty for love or power for protection? Is it weakness, or is it something deeper, something hidden in the shadows of the human mind? Tonight, we step into that shadow. We confront a mystery that has haunted philosophers, psychologists, and poets for centuries. A mystery that Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, dared to name. A theory so dark and unsettling that it continues to ripple through the worlds of psychology, philosophy, and politics. Prepare to question what you think you know about desire, suffering, and the strange allure of those who hurt us. Because sometimes the answers we fear the most are the ones that reveal who we truly are. Sigmund Freud was no stranger to darkness. By the time he reached the later years of his life, the world around him had changed, and so had he. Vienna, once a city of music and light, was now a place haunted by the ghosts of war, loss, and shattered illusions. Freud himself was aging, his health failing, his theories under attack. Yet, in the midst of this turmoil, he began to see something that would disturb even him, a pattern of suffering that defied explanation. Freud had built his early career on the idea that human beings are driven by the pursuit of pleasure, what he called eros, the life instinct. We seek love, comfort, satisfaction. But as he listened to his patients, as he analyzed his own dreams and memories, a darker truth began to emerge. Again and again, he saw people returning to the very sources of their pain. A woman who could not stop loving the man who betrayed her. A soldier who relived the horrors of battle, night after night. Children who repeated the traumas of their parents, as if bound by invisible chains. Freud called this phenomenon repetition compulsion. It was as if the mind, far from seeking only pleasure, was compelled to revisit its wounds, to circle back to suffering, to repeat what should have been left behind. Why? What force could be so powerful, so insidious, that would override the basic instinct for happiness? Haunted by this question, Freud proposed a theory that would shake the foundations of psychology: the death drive, or thanatos. Unlike eros, which seeks to create, connect, and preserve, thanatos is the urge to destroy, to dissolve, to return to an inorganic state. It is the pull toward oblivion, the longing for an end to tension, struggle, and even life itself. Freud saw evidence of the death drive everywhere, in the self-sabotaging behaviors of his patients, in the cycles of violence that tore through families and nations, in the relentless march of history toward catastrophe. He wrote, "The aim of all life is death." It was a statement as chilling as it was profound. But Freud's theory was not just about literal death. It was about the ways we unconsciously seek out our own undoing, the ways we are drawn to repeat the past, to reenact old wounds, to find comfort in the familiar pain. It was about the paradoxical safety of suffering, the strange sense of control we feel when we can predict our own misery. In post-war Vienna, surrounded by ruins and memories, Freud's ideas took on a new urgency. The city itself seemed to embody the death drive, a place unable to move forward, trapped in cycles of nostalgia and regret. Freud wondered if this was not just a personal affliction, but a universal human condition. What if beneath our conscious desires for love and happiness, there's a deeper, darker current, a drive that pulls us back toward what hurts us? What if our greatest enemy is not the world outside, but the shadow within? Freud's death drive was controversial, even among his followers. Some saw it as a pessimistic fantasy, a projection of his own suffering. Others recognized in it a profound truth about the human condition, that we are not simple creatures of pleasure and pain, but complex beings haunted by forces we barely understand. As we move forward, we must ask ourselves, are we truly seeking happiness, or are we, in some secret part of ourselves, searching for something else? Something darker, more dangerous, and infinitely more mysterious. If Freud's death drive is the shadow lurking beneath our desires, then modern psychology has illuminated the intricate pathways that lead us back to pain. The question is no longer just why we are drawn to what hurts us, but how our minds become entangled in these patterns, how suffering can become seductive, even addictive. Consider the phenomenon of trauma bonding. It's a term that sounds clinical, but its reality is raw and deeply human. Trauma bonds are forged in the fires of intermittent reward and punishment. When love and cruelty are doled out unpredictably, the mind becomes obsessed with seeking approval, desperate for the next moment of tenderness. The very person who wounds us becomes the only one who can soothe us. The cycle is self-perpetuating, a psychological trap that tightens with every repetition. This is not just the story of toxic romance. It's the story of children who cling to abusive parents, of employees who idolize tyrannical bosses, of citizens who defend leaders that exploit their fears. The brain, wired for survival, learns to equate pain with love, chaos with excitement, unpredictability with hope. The more uncertain the reward, the more powerful the craving. Intermittent reinforcement, a concept borrowed from behavioral psychology, explains why slot machines are so addictive and why relationships marked by inconsistency can be the hardest to leave. When affection is unpredictable, every small kindness feels like a jackpot. The pain becomes the price of admission, the suffering a sign that something valuable is at stake. But the roots of this attraction run even deeper. Attachment theory tells us that our earliest relationships, those with our caregivers, set the blueprint for how we love, trust, and suffer as adults. A child who learns that love is conditional, that affection must be earned or chased, may grow into an adult who seeks out the same dynamics over and over. The familiar pain feels like home, even when it hurts. Neurobiology adds another layer to the puzzle. Emotional pain and pleasure activate similar pathways in the brain. The chemicals released during moments of stress, longing, or heartbreak can mimic the rush of falling in love. The line between agony and ecstasy blurs, and the body becomes addicted to its own suffering. The allure of the unattainable is another thread in this tapestry. We are drawn to what we cannot have, to those who withhold, to the promise of fulfillment just out of reach. The chase becomes the story, the longing the reward. In a world where certainty is rare, desire thrives on the unknown. So, are we truly free in our choices? Or are we haunted by patterns written long before we understood their meaning? The psychology of wanting what hurts us is not a flaw, but a reflection of the complex, wounded, and resilient creatures we are. To understand this is not to excuse our suffering, but to begin the slow, difficult work of unraveling it. As we look deeper, we must ask, how much of our pain is chosen, and how much is inherited? And if we are haunted by the past, is it possible to break free, or are we destined to repeat the same story again and again? If the urge to return to pain is a mystery within the individual, it becomes something even more haunting when it plays out on the stage of history. The patterns of toxic attachment, of seeking validation from those who harm us, are not confined to private lives. They echo through the halls of power, shaping the destinies of entire nations. Throughout history, societies have been drawn to figures who promise salvation but deliver suffering. Charismatic dictators, cult leaders, and manipulative celebrities rise to power not just through force, but through a strange, almost magnetic appeal. The masses do not simply tolerate their oppressors. They idolize them, defend them, even love them. The question is, why? Freud, in his later writings, turned his gaze from the individual to the crowd. In his essay, Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego, he explored how the dynamics of the mind are amplified in the collective. The individual, he argued, loses a part of themselves in the group, surrendering critical thought for the comfort of belonging. The leader becomes a kind of super-parent, embodying both the promise of protection and the threat of punishment. This dynamic is not just theoretical. The 20th century is littered with examples. The rise of totalitarian regimes, the cult of personality surrounding figures like Stalin, Hitler, and Mao. These leaders did not simply seize power. They were invited in, welcomed, even worshipped. Their cruelty became a kind of spectacle, their violence a twisted form of reassurance. The people, in their millions, returned again and again to the source of their suffering. The psychology of mass movements is complex, but at its core is a familiar pattern. The longing for certainty, the seduction of authority, the comfort of being told what to do. In times of chaos and fear, the allure of a strong hand, even a cruel one, can be irresistible. The leader who embodies the people's anxieties and resentments becomes a mirror for their own darkness. Freud called this the narcissism of small differences, the tendency for groups to define themselves not by what unites them, but by what sets them apart from others. This creates a fertile ground for manipulation, as leaders exploit divisions, stoke fears, and offer simple answers to complex problems. The group, in turn, becomes addicted to its own suffering, finding meaning in struggle, identity in opposition, and comfort in submission. But this is not just a story of the past. Even today, we see societies rallying behind figures who exploit their wounds, who promise greatness while sowing division and pain. The cult of celebrity, the rise of populist leaders, the endless cycles of outrage and scandal, all are echoes of the same psychological forces that bind individuals to their abusers. Is there a collective death drive at work? Are we, as a species, drawn to our own undoing, compelled to repeat the traumas of history on an ever larger scale? Or is it simply that the patterns of the mind, when multiplied by millions, become inescapable? The line between personal and political suffering is thin, almost invisible. The same forces that keep us trapped in toxic relationships can keep entire societies in thrall to their oppressors. The question is not just why we return to those who hurt us, but why we build monuments to them, write songs in their honor, and teach our children to remember their names. Are we addicted to our own suffering? Or is there, hidden in the darkness, a lesson we have yet to learn? Freud could not have imagined the world we inhabit today, a world where the boundaries between public and private, pleasure and pain, are blurred by the relentless pulse of technology. Yet, his dark theory of our attraction to suffering finds new life in the digital age, where our deepest psychological vulnerabilities are not just exposed, but exploited on a global scale. Every day, billions of people reach for their phones, scrolling through endless feeds of outrage, heartbreak, and desire. The platforms we use are not neutral. They are engineered by teams of psychologists, designers, and data scientists to capture our attention and keep us coming back for more. The algorithms that power our social networks are not just tools. They are invisible puppeteers, pulling the strings of our emotions, shaping our perceptions, and feeding our compulsions. Consider the phenomenon of viral outrage. A single tweet, a controversial video, a scandalous headline. These are not just news, but triggers, carefully calibrated to provoke anger, fear, and tribal loyalty. The more we react, the more we share, the more the system rewards us with validation in the form of likes, shares, and comments. The cycle is addictive, and the pain, whether it's the sting of rejection, the anxiety of missing out, or the thrill of righteous indignation, becomes the hook that keeps us engaged. Toxic influencers and online personalities thrive in this environment, wielding power not through wisdom or compassion, but through the ability to provoke, manipulate, and divide. Their followers, caught in a web of intermittent reinforcement, return again and again for the next hit of drama, the next wave of controversy. The line between entertainment and exploitation vanishes, and the audience becomes both consumer and product. The design of digital platforms is no accident. Features like infinite scroll, push notifications, and algorithmic recommendations are built on the same principles that make slot machines irresistible. Intermittent rewards, unpredictable feedback, and the constant promise of something new. These are the tools of psychological control, turning users into addicts and attention into currency. Contemporary thinkers and whistleblowers have sounded the alarm. Former engineers from Silicon Valley have revealed how platforms are designed to hijack our attention, to exploit our insecurities, and to keep us locked in cycles of comparison, envy, and outrage. The very architecture of the internet is built to amplify our worst instincts, to turn our pain into profit. But the story does not end with victimhood. We are not just passive recipients of manipulation. We are active participants in a system that feeds on our suffering. Every click, every share, every moment of engagement is a vote for the world we inhabit. The platforms reflect not just the intentions of their creators, but the desires and compulsions of their users. Freud's insight that we are drawn to what hurts us has never been more relevant. In the age of algorithmic manipulation, our compulsion for pain and validation is not just a personal struggle, but a societal crisis. The question is no longer whether we are being manipulated, but whether we are willing to confront the forces, both within and without, that keep us trapped. As we navigate this new landscape, we must ask ourselves, are we the masters of our technology or its slaves? Are we seeking connection or simply repeating the same patterns of suffering on a digital stage? The answers may be unsettling, but they are essential if we hope to reclaim our minds and our freedom in the age of psychological control. If Freud's theory casts a long shadow over our desires, it also raises a question that is as urgent as it is unsettling. Are we doomed to repeat the same patterns of pain, or is there a way out? Is it possible to break the cycle, to choose differently, to step beyond the gravitational pull of what hurts us? For some, the answer begins in the quiet, difficult work of therapy. Modern therapeutic approaches, cognitive behavioral therapy, trauma-informed care, and psychoanalysis itself, offer tools for recognizing and interrupting the patterns that bind us. In the safety of the therapeutic space, people learn to name their wounds, to trace the origins of their suffering, and to challenge the beliefs that keep them trapped. The process is rarely easy. It demands honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to face the parts of ourselves we would rather avoid. But for many, it is the first real step toward freedom. Philosophical traditions, too, have long grappled with the question of suffering and choice. Existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir argued that we are condemned to be free, that even in the face of our deepest compulsions, we have the power to choose our response. Stoics like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus taught that while we cannot control what happens to us, we can control how we interpret and react to it. These philosophies do not promise an escape from pain, but they offer a way to transform it, a path from compulsion to conscious action. There are countless stories of people who have broken the cycle, who have walked away from toxic relationships, challenged abusive authority, or refused to be defined by their past. Their journeys are rarely linear. Relapse, doubt, and fear are constant companions. But each act of resistance, each moment of awareness, is a crack in the armor of repetition. So, what would it mean to choose differently? To recognize the allure of what hurts us, and to step away, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Is true freedom possible? Or are we forever haunted by the ghosts of our unconscious drives? Perhaps the answer lies not in denying our darkness, but in understanding it. Awareness is the first step toward transformation. By shining a light on the patterns that bind us, we begin to loosen their grip. In the end, the cycle can be broken, not by erasing our pain, but by learning to see it clearly and choosing again and again to move beyond it. As the story draws to a close, we are left with more questions than answers. The faces of those who have hurt us linger in our memories, their shadows stretching across the landscapes of our lives. Cities pulse with hidden wounds, and in the quiet moments, when the world is still and the noise fades, we are left alone with ourselves, forced to confront the mysteries that lie beneath the surface. Freud's dark theory is not a prophecy of doom, nor a sentence to endless suffering. It is a challenge, a call to look unflinchingly at the parts of ourselves we would rather ignore. The compulsion to return to pain, to seek out what wounds us, is not just a flaw in our character or a glitch in our psychology. It is a mirror, reflecting the complexity of the human soul. On the grand stage of history, and in the smallest corners of our hearts, the same patterns repeat. We idolize those who exploit us. We chase after what we cannot have. We find comfort in the familiar ache of longing. But what if these patterns are not chains, but clues? What if the people who hurt us are not just villains, but mirrors, showing us the parts of ourselves we refuse to see? To face the shadow within is to accept that darkness is not the enemy, but a teacher. Only by acknowledging our own capacity for suffering, for self-destruction, and for healing can we hope to break the cycle. The journey is not easy, and the answers are never simple. But in the end, it is only by facing our darkness that we can hope to find the light. The choice, as always, is ours. Freud was not alone in his exploration of the human psyche's darkest corners. His most famous disciple, and eventual rival, Carl Jung, saw the shadow not just as a force of destruction, but as a vital part of the journey toward wholeness. Where Freud saw the compulsion for pain as a death wish, Jung saw it as a summons, an invitation to confront the forbidden, the dangerous, and the unknown within ourselves. Jung's concept of the shadow is both simple and profound. It is everything we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, the impulses, desires, and fears that we push into the darkness. But the shadow does not disappear. It waits, lurking at the edges of consciousness, shaping our actions in ways we barely understand. The more we deny it, the more power it gains. Humanity's fascination with the shadow is woven through myth, literature, and art. In the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the respectable doctor's attempt to banish his darker self only gives it more strength. In the legend of Faust, the pursuit of forbidden knowledge leads to a pact with the devil, a bargain that costs him his soul. Even in modern culture, our obsession with antiheroes and villains reveals a deep curiosity about the parts of ourselves we fear the most. Jung believed that our attraction to darkness is not merely self-destructive. It is a call to integration, a chance to reclaim the lost and exiled parts of our psyche. To confront the shadow is to risk everything, but it is also the only path to true self-knowledge. The journey is perilous, filled with temptation and danger, but it is also transformative. In facing what we fear, we discover what we are capable of becoming. So, when we find ourselves drawn to those who hurt us, is it simply a repetition of old wounds, as Freud believed? Or is it, as Jung suggested, a subconscious attempt to integrate the parts of ourselves we have cast away? The line between self-destruction and self-discovery is razor thin. Sometimes, in seeking out our pain, we are also seeking to become whole. Perhaps the darkness we fear is not our enemy, but our guide. And perhaps, in the dance with our own shadow, we find the possibility of transformation.